You're listening to the Empowered Divorce Podcast, where you practice being the chooser in your life again, one day at a time. Thanks for joining me. Hello, my amazing, beautiful listeners. How are you today? In this moment, how are you? In this breath, how are you? How are you feeling? I would love to hear how these episodes on emotions and feelings and energy, how they are all assisting each of you in your healing journey and helping you to have an empowered divorce. And you can do that by going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a review. I would love to hear from you. And of course, it also helps other women who are also trying to find support in divorcing from betrayal and abuse. And it can feel so lonely. It can feel like no one's really hearing what my experience was like, because there's so many different aspects and pieces to having a divorce when this is your story. So share the insights that you are getting. It helps grow our amazing community of just freaking badass women. So, all right, love it. I also just wanted to mention really quickly that coming the end of May, my gosh, can you believe we're like through April? Coming the end of May. I think that by the time this airs, it'll be towards the end of April, but the end of May, there will be another Dating from Within workshop. And let me just ask you a question here. How many times have you heard me talk about this Dating from Within workshop and you have thought, okay, I'll just wait for the next one. Okay, I'll just wait for the next one. I'm not ready. I'm just going to wait for the next one. Okay, you know who I'm talking about. Push pause, go over to the show notes right now, click the link, register, get your spot. Just do it. Let's just do this thing. I promise you will not be disappointed. And I promise you do not have to date in order to take this. But it's going to help you connect back towards yourself in very key ways. You're going to get really, really key information that you're going to want to know before you even start dating. That's okay. If you've started dating, you're still going to want to learn all of this because you want to connect back towards you first and you want to date from within first. Think of it like a pre-dating workshop. Okay. It is going to be awesome. And I won't be doing another workshop until the end of August, I think. I have a grandson on the way this summer. And so I'm going to be grandma of two and will be full-time grandmothering this summer. So if you want to possibly, perhaps, maybe try out this dating thing this summer, then you're going to want to take this workshop in May. We have fun. I promise. Okay. This episode today is in response to a few emails that came in. And I think between all, maybe there were 3 or 4, but between all the emails, yeah, they had different situations and different concerns were fairly similar, but underneath the questions and what these women were sharing and asking, it came down to, how do I assess healthy emotional maturity in other people? Right? Like, how do I know that they are emotionally mature? And it makes sense why this is something that we're worried about, especially if you came from an emotionally immature family system. And then, of course, many of you probably can very much relate to an emotionally immature spouse. Narcissism is essentially emotional immaturity. When that's been your experience and has impacted you so deeply because of that, then of course, you're going to want to be able to assess what that looks like. And I'm not just saying this because I talked about the Dating from Within workshop, but we do dive into this piece here because this comes up so much. This was a big concern of mine when I started navigating the dating. And there was always this question of but how will I know? But how will I know? So today we're going to talk about that. I'm going to let you know how you will know and hopefully answer those of you who emailed around how to assess other people's emotional maturity and, I guess, immaturity. This, of course, reminds me of all of the amazing, beautiful, just brilliant content of Lindsay Gibson. And I actually gave this assessment that she has. She has one, I think she has a few, but she has this one assessment on how to assess emotional maturity. I gave it to my Believing in You members a couple of weeks ago, I think. And so I'm I thought, well, let me just let you all in on this tool as well. I've learned so much from her. It has helped me in my healing, not only individually and helped me in my growth mindset and my own emotional maturing, but my gosh, has this also helped me as a mom? It's helped me with other relationships and it helped me to identify a healthy partner as well. So it is something that I could talk and talk and talk and talk about. Going to try and just limit this for you today and talk specifically about how you can assess healthy in other people. Before I go into some of these key points of emotional maturity, I also just want to highlight something that one of these emails mentioned. She was talking about how she was wanting to know how she can improve and show up healthier in future relationships, whether it's with her kids or a future dating partner. She was wanting to be guided to some tools on how she can show up healthy. So, with that, I am going to share a few things that you can look for and recognize healthy and more emotionally mature people, those characteristics, I guess, in other people. And this list, of course, can be turned around towards yourself and can be used to do a self check, right? Have some self awareness. There's that first pillar of healing, right? Awareness. So drop into some self awareness, which, by the way, is a very emotionally mature thing to do. I am also going to share with you a couple other things to consider as my audience here is mainly women who have gone through betrayal, abuse, and divorce. Going through that much destruction is absolutely going to have an impact on you. And many of you, has stayed in your relationship, your unhealthy, destructive relationships for years, if not decades. So you learned some of these unhealthy ways of coping. I'm going to point out a few so that you can be aware of these and just notice if these are showing up for you. And as my listener asked me in her email, these are going to be a great place to start that self reflecting and to be more aware of as you start to navigate relationships and want to show up in a healthy, emotional, mature way. So today, my hope is that you walk away with some really great things to look for and also practice some emotional maturity. Okay, first, I think it is important to start this work by being willing to look at old patterns from your childhood and family of origin, patterns in how you showed up in your marriage, patterns of the destructive behaviors in your marriage. This is why I offer the relationship dynamic assessment to really help get a very clear picture of what you experienced in each of those 8 domains of the relationship. But looking at your past is so, so, so important in order to be able to consciously choose in the present, not repeat those patterns in the future. I'm just going to read what Lindsay says here about looking in the past. She also talks about this and agrees that it is really important to be able to look at how, like, where we came from and why we do what we do, why we allow what we allow, why we've accepted what we accepted. I I hear from clients all the time, like, they're mad at themselves and they really have a hard time forgiving themselves. And man, I was right there. So I'm not like excusing myself from this experience. I was right there. But they have a hard time forgiving themselves for allowing the behavior, staying too long. I hear that a lot. Why did I stay so long? Why didn't I see this before? Then they beat themselves up and they believe that they should have been done something differently when the truth is, each of us did exactly what we were, supposed to do. If we want to use the S word, we were supposed to do this because of what we knew and didn't know, and what we were taught to accept and allow due to our family of origin. One of the things that kind of deters people from Lindsay's work, I think, is that a lot of us don't want to go into parent bashing. I know for me, I wouldn't be here. I mean, not just literally wouldn't be here because of them, for obvious reasons. But I would not have gotten out of my abusive situation if it weren't for my parents. Like, they saved me. They scraped me off of a bench at an airport, scooped me up, put me in a car. 3 days later, when I woke up, they were like, okay, we got to come up with a plan, because they saw the destruction. They saw what being with an emotionally immature, abusive partner was doing to me, how it had completely destroyed me, how they didn't even recognize me like physically because of what it did to me. And in order for me to stay in that relationship as long as I did, I also learned how to cope. And those coping skills were unhealthy. And in a lot of the ways that I showed up was also due to my own emotional immaturity. And look, none of us were taught this. I wish they would teach this in school. Like, come on. This isn't something that you sign up for in school, right? Let me take chemistry along with emotional maturity. No. So be very, very easy on yourself and leaning into looking at your past, your family of origin and the dynamics and the history and even right, even the generational history of how we did things in this family, in this system is really, really important for you to observe and look and then decide, did that serve me? And if not, then what is a healthier way to approach? Being able to look at how you showed up. And again, did that serve me? And if not, then how will I decide to approach this in the future? So that's what we're doing here. What Lindsay says here, she's also encouraging what she has found in her years and years of work around emotional maturity as well is how important it is to not repeat the pattern. We got to look at the past. We don't want to repeat the pattern in the future. Then we have to look at the patterns of the past. And so I'm going to paraphrase here just a little bit. She's actually quoting John Bowlby in 1979, who said that all humans share the primitive instinct that familiarity means safe. Okay, that right there, oh gosh, makes me have the shivers because really what we have learned to do is affiliate. We have learned to affiliate with what was familiar. And a lot of times, what now has been dubbed as maybe a fawn response, I believe is more affiliate. We have learned to we've been familiarized with a certain behavior, certain level of emotional immaturity or maturity. That's what feels safe to us. So, if, for example, if you grew up with a father who only showed you love, affection, and attention when you did what he wanted you to do, that's what you're familiar with as a little one. That's what became safe. And as a little one, it's too dangerous to oppose or reject or say, "Ooh, I don't like that," because you need this person to survive and stay alive. So you become your whole entire system familiarizes yourself with this type of behavior in the family system. When you meet someone in the future that has that familiarity, when they show up in that same emotionally immature way, it's not going to ring the flags. It's not going to make you go, whoa, 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 hold on a second here. This might not be good. This doesn't feel good. It actually feels safe. If you grew up with emotionally immature parents, you might feel subconsciously drawn. There's the familiarity. My editor's going to have a fun time editing that, how many times I've actually said that word. Uh, it's late. I'm recording this late. Okay. Anyways, if you grow up with emotionally immature parents, then you're going to feel this subconscious sense, this like you're not prefrontal cortex. You're not going to consciously be like, oh gosh, being stonewalled feels really safe. That's not what you're thinking consciously. But again, subconsciously, where it's very much in your body systematically, right, is going to be drawn to the familiarity of the egocentric and exploitive people. She says, quite a few of my female clients who ended up in abusive relationships distinctly remember that in high school, the quote, nice boys didn't appeal to them. In fact, they typically found the males that were considerate boring, which unfortunately meant that if the guy's behavior wasn't selfish or dominating enough, there was no attraction. Okay, maybe you need to hit pause and just sit with that for a minute, right? Or rewind that. Like, yes, yes, and yes. I see this so much, not only in my own life, but in so many of my clients' experiences. And then what they do is they blame themselves and they think something's wrong with them. Yet what I'm sharing here, what I know to be true, and what Lindsay is offering to consider here is that when you grew up to be selfless, like don't think about yourself, then you will most often attract selfish. That's what's actually going to be attractive and what will feel, quote, safe. For these women, self centered males probably stirred up uncertainty in a way that they found exciting. But was this actual excitement, or was it a shiver of childhood anxiety in response to a self involved person who wanted to use them? Ooh, like, wow. I can only imagine how many of you are relating to this. I see this so much when I'm doing brain spotting and we're healing childhood wounds or ancestry wounds. Like everything that she's talking about here shows up so somatically in the body. It's like the story that the body knows about and we just don't know cognitively about. But what one tenet of schema therapy developed by Jeffrey Young is that the people we find most charismatic are subconsciously triggering us to fall back into old negative family patterns. Young warns that this kind of instant chemistry can be a danger sign, indicating that self-defeating roles from childhood are being reactivated beneath the surface. Can you see why and how important it is to start the journey of not only developing more emotional maturity, but recognizing in other people means looking at the past, looking at how you showed up in the past. This is what we do. And like I said, this is what we do in my Dating Within workshop. We spend the whole first session on the past because it is so important to be able to see yourself in the past rather than see your ex and him in the past. You know, how many of you look at the past, at your past experience, and your immediate thoughts and focus is on him, what he did, what he didn't do, and how he impacted you? What we want to shift towards when we're talking about emotional maturity and growth mindset here is what we want to shift towards is looking at how we showed up in the past. What was it that we allowed or thought was okay and why, so that we don't show up that way in the future? Okay, so let me go through just a framework to help you assess emotional maturity in others. Some of these are adapted from Lindsay Gibson and her work, of course, but the first one I'd say to look for is self-awareness. Now, like in another person, is this person that I am with, are they self-aware? How many, I mean, how many of you have actually been, you know, and I'm not saying self-aware in the sense of they are only aware of themselves, okay, and not you in the conversation, but they are aware of their emotions, they are aware of their motivations, they are aware of how they think they feel and what they do and how it impacts and affects other people, right? That kind of self-awareness. It's like when I'm teaching my 16-year-old who has a 16-year-old brain, and I have to remind myself of that, like, hey, we're not dealing with fully developed brain. But how many times I want to look at him and be like, if you two people can see me, I just want to be like, hello, what's in there? The way that you are behaving impacts everybody around you right now. And there is zero self-awareness right now going on in your brain, right? I know many of you can relate to this with teenagers, perhaps. But when we're looking and communicating with other adults who do have fully developed brains, are they self-aware? Do they know that they actually own their thoughts and can be the choosers of them? Do they know that they are actually the ones that create their own emotions, and are they aware of their emotions? For example, if you're talking to them and you hear a lot of, he made me feel, they made me mad, that would be a little red flag of they are not self-aware. Now, I know sometimes we can flippantly say that, right? Like, oh my gosh, you made me so mad. Do they really know that other people actually don't make you mad? That is the kind of self-awareness that we're looking for. Do they constantly seek to understand themselves better? That would be self-awareness, which I think I can add something else under this one that just came to my mind too, is when you have this self-awareness, then it allows you to think and feel at the same time. Meaning that even when a person is upset, even when a person, maybe isn't happy with the situation, someone who can think and feel at the same time is someone that you can reason with. Like, just look at your 3-year-old. Like, or my 2-year-old granddaughter right now, right? Like, when she wants something, there's no reasoning with her. Right? She is all emotion, that right brain emotion, which makes sense because there's no connectors to left and right brain at this age. In fact, I just learned in an attachment training this past weekend, that the connector between left and right brain, which the official term is corpus callosum, that actually doesn't get developed until around age 12. Isn't that fascinating? So all of these children, 12 and under, where we're like, what are you thinking? Or why can't you just reason? Because they don't have their corpus callosum. Like, there's a really good reason for that. Anyways, I'm getting nerdy sidetracked. But those who are self-aware can think and feel at the same time. So you can reason with them. They have the ability to see someone else's perspective, which goes into empathy, which I'll talk about here in a minute. But they don't lose that ability. They don't let whatever emotion is showing up overpower and overtake their ability to reason, to rationalize, to have empathy, to show up, all the things, right? So that would, I don't know, I guess that might fall into self-awareness. I think it's just what came to my mind when I was talking about that. But the next one that you can look for when you are trying to assess emotional maturity in other people is responsibility for actions. And all of you are just probably saying amen, hallelujah, right? Like, hell yes. Because how many of you, like, were in a relationship with your ex and there was just, and still maybe is, no accountability and responsibility for their actions. So definitely a sign of emotional immaturity when they can't do that. When they can accept responsibility for not even their actions, but their thoughts, their feelings, and their actions and their mistakes. And they do not shift blame onto other people, onto you. They can apologize genuinely when they have done wrong. That responsibility for actions is a sign of emotional maturity. Even if it's a little painful, they will do it. And I say that because just the other day, and I know Scott doesn't listen to my podcast, so I'll totally rat him out. But just the other day, I walked over to the kitchen table and I had pulled off the tablecloth to wash it. And he had put he's a bow hunter. So he put all of his bow stuff and toolbox and everything on the kitchen table, and it chipped the table a little bit. And so I walked over to put the tablecloth back on and I noticed the chips. I was like, oh, dang it. There's chips in the table. And he goes, oh, shoot. And I said, oh, I think it might be from your bow. And at that point, he had the choice to deny, and walk away. Just kidding. He could deny, or he could just be like not say anything. He could feel all of the guilt and the shame and then turn inward, retreat, run, flee, freeze. But he was able to look at that and go, huh, I'm so sorry. I will not do that. Like, I will not put my bow on there anymore without the tablecloth. I'm so sorry. Because he knows how much I love my table. But he was able to apologize for that and own his actions. And now, because I can read people like a book, blessing and a curse, I could tell that there was a moment, there was this brief moment where that part of him was like, eh. And I think we all can relate, right? We all can relate to when we've just done something wrong, or we've hurt someone, or there's this moment where we want to retreat. We want to go in our turtle shell or run away or deny. And yet the emotional and mature person will recognize that, but push through and own their shit anyways. So that was just a funny little example of how I could tell that there was that moment, I could see it. And then he was like, I'm so sorry. And it really was genuine, probably because he just doesn't want to buy another table. So he's going to take care of it for me. Okay. The next one is empathy. Now, what you're going to notice in someone around this one is that they're going to show genuine empathy and interest in other people. So those of you who are actually dating and looking to get into a serious relationship with someone, you want to notice this first in how this shows up with other people versus you. Sometimes my clients will be like, oh, he shows me so much empathy. He shows me so much this. I'm like, okay, that's great. Of course he is. But does he do this with other people? So I encourage my clients to look at these characteristics that I'm talking about and how they do this with other people first. Of course, they're going to put on their best behavior with you. Watch what they do and how they interact and say and talk about other people. So, are they sharing stories about friends, family? And when they're sharing their story, do they lack empathy for that other person? And if so, that's a sign of emotional immaturity. I love Brene Brown's work in The Atlas for the Heart. If you haven't read that book, oh my gosh, Atlas of the Heart. I actually like her Audible. She throws a couple extra things in there because she's actually the one that is reading the book on Audible. So she does a little ad lib. So I would recommend listening to it as well. I love how she talks about and taught me the difference between affective empathy and cognitive empathy. So we can cognitively empathize with someone where that prefrontal cortex, where we can say the words, right? That's where our language is. We can say, oh, that must be really hard. Affective empathy is the actual emotion. It's the feeling, it's the embodied behind it. And those two things together, phew, that is a powerhouse of emotional maturity. Okay, the next one, regulation of emotions. Now, when you're looking for someone and assessing their maturity, do they manage their emotional responses? This is where they're not going to let those feelings that come up, again, outside of a trauma response, they're not going to let their emotions overwhelm them and then drive them to make impulsive decisions. This is one of the things that my dad pointed out about my ex immediately. Like, I noticed that he's impulsive. Right? He has a lot of impulsivities. Rather, emotional, mature people are going to respond to these situations very thoughtfully. I still am learning so much about this from Scott, actually, because he has the ability to do this. It's a gift. I wish I had more of it, but I am practicing because emotionally mature people are realistic enough to not be offended so easily, and they can laugh at themselves and they can laugh at their follies, and maybe not even laugh, but they can own it, right? They can accept it. They're not so quick to blame other people. They're not going to take things so personally and make everything that everybody does mean something about them. I think a lot of you who have been in relationships with someone who has narcissistic tendencies know what that's like. I think another reason why regulation of emotions is such a huge sign of emotional maturity is that staying in that window of tolerance, right? When you can actually feel your feelings, you can process them, you have the maturity to do that for yourself. And now we're not looking for other people to regulate us. And many of us learned how to do this with our primary caregiver as little one. We looked towards other things, external things to regulate our internal locus of control, our emotions inside. And being able to develop that maturity takes practice. But when you haven't been taught it or it hasn't been emulated, then you need to practice this. This is something that you definitely want to be able to work on because especially for those of you who are wanting to get into another relationship or consider another relationship, you don't want to go into that with this idea that if I get into this relationship, then I will feel better, then I will feel safe, then I will feel cared for, provided for, protected. Right? That is an emotional, immature way to approach a relationship. You want to be able to cultivate that for yourself first. Because, and I promise, in healthy relationships, at one point or another, that person won't be able to be there to meet that need for whatever reason. And if you then crumble to the floor or take it too personally or become super overwhelmed by your emotions of this person not meeting your needs, it's going to cause not only you problems, but relational problems. So when you're looking, what you're looking for in terms of, is this person emotionally mature? Do they regulate their own emotions or do they lash out? Do they have emotional outbursts? Even if they say, sorry, I'm sorry, that is still a sign of emotional immaturity, especially if it's something that's happening over and over. You want to watch that very, very carefully. I think this is where a lot of you can relate to the emotional abuse that you've experienced. That might have been the pattern, right? Where you have the emotional lash out, where they attack your emotions or they make you responsible for their emotions. They emotionally vomit, and then they can say, hey, I'm really sorry. Or they don't say sorry and they just wake up the next morning and pretend nothing happened and act like everything is great. That type of abuse, if you've experienced that your whole life, is again going to be familiar and feel, and I'm air quoting here if you can't see me, safe. An emotionally mature person doesn't do that. They own their own reactions and response and feelings that they are having. Okay, the next one is resilience. Emotionally mature people can cope with stress. They can cope with setbacks in life. They can cope with disappointment. When things don't turn out the way that they hope or that they want, they are able to feel the emotions. There's emotional maturity. They can feel and process the sad, the grief. They can process the disappointment and feel that. And they are able to bounce back from those challenges and continue to move forward. They don't get stuck there, and they don't get stuck there in the victim or the blaming either. This resilience is what each of you hopefully are practicing. And what I try to offer in each one of my episodes is how can you move forward and thrive and step into that sense of empowerment to start building resiliency so that when and if something happens again, because truth be told, it might, maybe not to the level that you've already experienced, but we're going to have hard things happen. We want to be able to learn how to cope with these stresses and setbacks and disappointments and hard from a place of emotional maturity. Okay, the next one is respect for boundaries. Does the person you're observing respect other people's boundaries? Do they respect their own boundaries? I was telling this to my divorce, to the ladies in my workshop, like watch for how they respect their own boundaries. Do they even have them? Do they mention them? Do they hold to them? Or do they bust through their own boundaries? Do they bust through other people's boundaries? Do they even talk about what other people have said? This isn't okay for me. And then you hear them trash talk them. You really, really cannot say this enough. If you are observing someone for this emotional, like you're assessing their emotional maturity, watch how they talk about and interact and treat other people, not so much how they treat you right now. I'm not saying don't watch that, but you really want to watch how they're showing up in other people's lives, because more than likely they're going to show up, and I'm air quoting, spot on and right with you for a while until it gets comfortable. So I want you to date long, and then their true colors come out. So in the meantime, you're really paying attention. Do they respect other people's boundaries? And this includes physical boundaries, emotional boundaries, and intellectual boundaries. You know, when you go on a date, does he just absolutely trash talk his coworkers or his ex? I would consider that an intellectual boundary. Emotionally mature people are innately courteous because they naturally honor boundaries. This isn't something that they have to work hard at if they have this level of emotional maturity, because they're looking for that healthy connection and closeness with people and not intrusion. They're not trying to intrude into someone's life. That's what happens when people push boundaries, is right. They're intruder alert. Right? They're crossing over the boundary and the alarms go off and they don't care. They're intruding. Emotionally mature people naturally want to connect with someone, and they're respectful, listen and watch for how signs of how they can do that. Where immaturity is going to be, I'm going to be close to you no matter what happens, no matter how I get there. I'm going to be close to you. This can very easily come across as caring and loving and, oh my gosh, he wants so badly to be with me. Look at how much he is intruding. I had a client who was telling me that the guy she was dating, I don't say boyfriend, but I think they were just whatever. Anyways, they were dating and he showed up everywhere. Like he showed up at her work. He showed up when she mentioned she's going to the park. He would show up at the park, and he just kept showing up places. She was telling him where she was at. It's not like, he was completely stalking her, but he would still show up. One time he showed up at the grocery store because she's like, oh, I'm going to run over to Lucky and I'm going to go grocery shopping. He showed up at the store. And her initial feeling, her initial sense was like, that feels weird. Like if you're watching my body, that's what her body did. It went backwards. Like, okay, what is First of all, when you notice your body pull away, please stop and be aware and recognize what's happening there. That is an intuitive physical response to something. As she was telling me this, she did that. Hold on a second here. And she started to feel a little bit intruded on, meaning he was just like always there. And yet he would say, well, I just want to be with you. I just like you so much. I just have so much fun. You're just so amazing. Da, 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 da. And it doesn't matter how late, and it doesn't matter how far I have to drive. It doesn't matter. I'm certainly not going to take in consideration how you matter and feel. I'm going to intrude anyways. That is a disrespect of boundaries. And that is how someone who is emotionally immature is going to show up. Someone who is emotionally mature is going to respect your individuality. They're going to expect it. They're going to expect that you will show up as an individual, not show up as someone who serves their own purposes or who they think can make you better if they are in your life. Okay, the next one is consistency. I think I'm going to have to make this 2 parts. I wrote just really quick notes, and I'm finding myself just talking a lot more than I had planned on, and I'm even trying to hold back. So I think I might have to make this 2 parts. Anyways, the next one is consistency. When you are observing emotional maturity in someone, they are going to be reliable and consistent in their words and their actions. This builds trust. Brene Brown in her Elements of Trust, right? That's one of the things that she talks about is reliability. I can interchange these, reliability or consistency, same thing, because you can rely on them to be consistent, not just once, but over and over and over and over. That's consistency. And do they show up the same? And when I mean the same is in kindness, in character, in integrity, in values over and over and over and over. That builds trust. That builds trust in the relationship. Emotional mature people do that. They're aware of that. They want to do that. They want to be that type of person. I think this is a really good one to be aware of also because it helps you assess the reality of the situation also. And emotionally mature people work with the reality rather than fight against the reality. I'm going to say that again. Emotionally mature people work with things as they really are, with reality. Emotionally immature people fight against it. That's the denial. That's the blame, justification, minimization, rationalization. If there's something that you don't like, or this person you're observing that they don't like, emotionally mature people are going to acknowledge that, acknowledge the reality, and then look for solutions, look for what they can control and how they can solve that problem within their control. Okay, the next one is communication. This can be a whole podcast. Maybe I will do a whole one on this, but communicating in a healthy, mature, in an emotionally mature way means that they are adaptable to change and open to new ideas. I like to put this one under, if you haven't taken my Intimacy Within self-paced course, it's going through all those 7 different levels of intimacy. And that second one, cognitive intimacy, is your thoughts, ideas, and opinions. When you communicate with someone, your thoughts, your ideas, and your opinions, an emotionally mature person will be able to accept those as yours. They will not throw them back at you. They will not say, you're wrong. How could you think that way? That's ridiculous. They're going to be able to also communicate their thoughts, feelings, ideas, opinions. There's not going to be that game playing, right? There's not going to be like, well, you should know what I think. Well, if you love me, then you should know what I feel. Okay. That is emotionally immature to like the max, right? Can they communicate their needs? Can they communicate their wants? Can they communicate where they would like you to show up in their life and how? That is emotional maturity. Again, in this realm of communication, do they listen? I was dating a guy and, went on a date with a guy, I should say, because it was only one date after this. But while we're on the date, he's on his phone the entire time. And I remember thinking, is he listening to me? For a little bit, it was confusing because he would respond at all the right times. He would say things in response, but he really wasn't communicating in a mature way. His eyes were on his phone. He was flipping through things, whatever. Even if it was like, oh, that reminds me, because he's like, oh, I'm listening to you. And what you said was so funny. And that reminds me of this really funny meme. And he's flipping through his phone, right? No. First date, second date, trying to get to know each other. No, that for me, that was a no-brainer. See you later. Healthy communication is active listening because you have a right to take up space. You have a right to be heard. You have a right to be seen. If you don't feel heard or seen when you share your beautiful thoughts, ideas, and opinions with someone, then I think there's some emotional immaturity happening or in their lack of communication, in their lack of ability to communicate. You really, really want to be able to see that. I want to be specific here because I had a client that said, well, yeah, he yells and we get in arguments, but we will talk for hours about that and really communicate well. And I'm like, hold up, sister. Hold up. Hours of talking about how someone behaved in a conversation is not emotionally mature or healthy communication. Okay. And I think a lot of you have experienced that. I don't know about you, but I remember talking for hours, going in circles, feeling like we're beating a dead horse until the conversation ended. And in most cases, that conversation ended because I eventually took responsibility for something that wasn't even mine to be responsible for, or I was told where I was maybe wrong or not expressing myself enough or communicating, or I wasn't the one communicating healthy enough. That's why, da, da, da. So if I owned that, then the conversation would end. But before that, it would go on for hours around the same thing. And I remember just leaving those conversations feeling emotionally, mentally, and physically drained. That is not healthy communication. That is not emotionally mature communication. Okay, the next one, flexibility. Now, emotionally mature people, they're going to be adaptable to change. They're going to be open to new ideas. They aren't going to be so rigid on this is what has to happen. And it's funny because I've been working on this with my therapist lately, actually, because that is an immaturity that I've noticed in myself. When things don't go according to plan, woo, man, it like throws my entire day off. So we've been digging into that a little bit. It's been so fascinating to see what's underneath that. If plans change, then that means, and what's under it. Very, very cool to see and be able to unravel that a little bit. I'm already noticing more maturity in the ability to adapt and change. But this is something that you want to look for. There can be some flexibility. There's some adaptability. They can compromise when necessary, not compromise values, not compromise integrity, right? But they can compromise when necessary because they're not insisting on having it their way and only their way. It's that old saying, your way or the highway. I used to hear that all the time. And if you feel like you're not very flexible, if that is hard for you, it makes sense, especially if you have experienced abuse in your past, that need to control and do things a certain way is a very natural consequence of growing up of experiencing abusive behavior and that subterfuge. But that goes back to like why we need to look at the past and see why we are not maybe flexible. Either way, when you're trying to assess this in other people, that's one thing that you can look for is their ability to adapt and change. They're not going to be like, oh my gosh, and berate you and yell at you and get mad at you and even trash talk you if you don't do things exactly as they had planned. So that would be something to look for. Okay, the last one that I'll share, because again, I could go on and on, but the last one I'll just share is, and I think this is a really important one that I don't hear talked about enough. It's share humor and enjoyment. Emotional maturity comes from the ability to share humor and have joy and have fun and be playful and appreciate the lighter side of life. I don't know about you, but man, when life kicked my ass and dragged me around a little bit, it was hard to have joy and it was hard to laugh. I mean, there was some humor I had to find in the audacity of my ex, but that's just like sick, twisted humor. I'm talking about I'm talking about really healthy, emotionally mature humor and not humor at the expense of others, right? How many of you perhaps noticed that in other people where they're joking and they're laughing and it's funny, but it's at the expense of someone else? That is not actually the healthy, emotional, mature humor that I'm talking about. But this idea of sharing humor and joy to deepen your connection with that person is emotionally mature. I think one of the most beautiful things that I have since learned to be able to do that I didn't know that I wasn't able to do before that I can do now is even be able to laugh at myself, not take myself so seriously, and being able to be playful with certain parts of myself that are perhaps more immature or just weaknesses, right? Tendencies, quirks that I notice about myself. It has been a new experience to be a little bit more playful and humored with that part of me and in the relationship, just enjoying good, healthy, mature humor. Again, that lighter side of life, I think shows a really healthy sign of emotional maturity. Because if you've got someone that is so serious, so focused, so driven, right? Or the extreme on the other side of the pendulum, you want to have a little bit of that balance. So I just wanted to throw that one in there because I think that's really important to look for too. Okay. I am going to make this a double episode because what I want to talk about next is addressing some emotional, immature ways of showing up that you might be familiar with. I know I am familiar with when you have experienced betrayal, abuse in your past relationship, or unhealthy and emotional immaturity in your family system. Part of the healing journey is to be able to learn, to grow, to develop, to become new so that you attract, that you create new. I'm going to talk about that next week. I've given you enough to look through, to think about, to ponder over when you are trying to observe and assess someone else's emotional maturity and what that looks like. In the meantime, this week, before part 2 next week, take this list that I just went through and apply it to you. Look at yourself and how you're showing up in these different categories that I mentioned today. Remember, do so from that first pillar of awareness, where you have self-compassion, where you drop into curiosity, not judgment or shame. We are all learning here. We're all on this journey as humans, learning how to be mature humans. The very fact that you're listening to this episode says a lot about your growth mindset and about how you want to show up as a human. Like I say, there's no arrival. We're always learning and growing, and we have so many opportunities to learn and grow. One of the things that you can do in having an empowered divorce is looking at your experience in the past and being able to determine what you can learn from that, how you can grow from that, how you can start being the chooser in your life and choose something different, choose to experience something different, especially choose to experience more emotional maturity because you can. Take care, everybody.
I was born to fly and spread these wings and find my own. I am coming home. Today will be the day it all will change. Nothing, no one's in my way. Today will be the day. Today will be the day. I was made to dream that anything can be my own. I have found my home. Today will be the day. a day